Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is AWS On Air, the startup show where every single Tuesday we come to you live and we help you on a specific topic relating to building a startup on AWS. So my name is Jillian Ford and I am a startup solutions architect at AWS. And today's topic is going to be about building an AI MVP, and with the focus being on generative AI, how to build a generative AI MVP fast. And I've got an amazing co-host who knows so much about this topic, so much passionate on generative AI. George, want to say hi?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Jillian, it's awesome being here. I'm George. I'm a startup solutions architect, same as Jillian. We're part of the same team. And like Jillian said, I am truly passionate about AI in general, and as of late, generative AI. So the main focus for today is basically guiding guiding you through the mind process of how to build an MVP using generative AIs. What are the tools? What should be the mindset? And basically making it as interactive as possible. It's not going to be a lecture by any means.
No.
So please feel free to ask us questions. That's what we'd love. And yeah,
Love it.
very
And
excited to be
we've already
here.
got people from all over the world. I love this. We've got Francisco from Spain. Hi, Adriano. Estelle, good evening from France. Boguslav, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Claudio from Chile. Bilal, we got Adriano from Brazil. Denise from Philly. Roberto from Guatemala. Leopold from Mexico. We've got Houston in the house. Plano, Texas, England. I just love how diverse people from all over the world today. Hamburg, a lot of Texas is really showing up. Chile, Australia. Oh my God, it's like 4 a.m. Oh, Austria. But even still, yeah, that's like the evening. All over. Yes, keep telling us where you're from. And I always start the show with an icebreaker. So yes, please tell us where you're from and tell us what is your favorite beverage. Pop in the chat what your favorite beverage is. And George, tell everyone what is your favorite beverage.
Okay, so we had this conversation before we started the stream. I think we're both on the coffee nerd scale. We're kind of high
Oh
up.
yeah.
So for me, my beverage of choice for today is a very light roasted Ethiopian coffee from
Ooh.
a very nice roaster in Denmark. So that would be mine. So it's effectively like a pour over, and I love it. But it's kind of funny seeing people, giving us their answers. Pretty awesome
Yeah,
stuff.
did we have it? I'm looking if we have any from Denmark in the chat. I don't think so. If we did, I would say to tell us what the roaster is and see what we've got. Ooh, brewed ginger root. Nice,
Yep.
Denise. All right.
Very nice.
I like it. We've got lemon and ginger tea. Very good.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
definitely coffee. I would say I'm up with that too. Oh, Egyptian coffee. Have you had Egyptian coffee? V60?
No, never. But sounds very interesting.
Yeah. Masala tea in India. I like these teas. Yeah. Well, maybe next week will be a tea time and startups topic. Or coffee and AI. I think that's going to be our next theme next time we do this.
Don't
Matthew's
give everything
also,
away.
yeah,
Don't give
Matthew,
it.
bring your coffee next time with us, and we're talking about AI and coffee. Oh, Guinness, Ireland with the Guinness.
There we go.
Kieran, oh, I love it. No coffee, just water. Okay, I like it. We've got Ukraine. We've got Barry with sometimes Diet Coke. Turkish coffee. Oh my God, that has a soft spot in my heart. What do you think about Turkish coffee?
It's great. It's awesome. Like I'm Greek, so Turkish coffee is present in Greece. So we drink a lot of it. It's the same kind of thing. Depending on the country you're in, it has a different name, but it's the same thing effectively. It does have a very soft spot in my heart too.
Yeah, all these different coffees. I love it. We've got, yeah, Nescafe, Brazil, and the Earl Grey. Thank you for warming up today with telling us your favorite beverage and the reason why I do that is because this is supposed to be interactive. So as we are talking about how to build a generative AI startup, building that MVP for your business, we want you to ask questions throughout. So feel free, ask questions in the chat. I'm going to be looking at it, and that's really what we're here for. But let's go to what it is that we have planned today. George, I know you were saying earlier that startups come to you and they'll say, what can I actually be doing with generative AI? I've started to hear all the buzz about generative AI. So what would you tell them?
Sure. Before I get to that, keeping it interactive, I need to ask, what's your favorite beverage before I get to that? So what's your favorite beverage?
Okay, I'm a sucker for a really good latte, and it's such a good latte when you've got the nice flavor of the espresso, and then when the barista makes it it almost tastes like butter at the top of the way the milk has just been frothed. Yeah, that's just it's just
There
a
we go.
beautiful beverage. But yes, thank you for asking. But please continue on generative AI.
Sure. So just for a bit of context, right? So I'm based out of California. I have the privilege of working with a lot of early stage startups, and I see a lot of amazing ideas, and I get to be part of building them tangentially. So I help startups basically try to find the right tools to build. I see a lot of amazing ideas, and when it comes to generative AI. Most of the things you will see on social media platforms, let's say a week ago, you see startups implementing now. So there's two aspects to generative AI. There's the aspect of I've worked with customers and startups that have very deep knowledge of all the foundational models. They know how to do things, and they're looking for how to scale them on AWS. So effectively, their MVP focuses a lot more on how to scale, how to reach a very large audience, how to optimize. And then there's the other part of it. So the other part is, how can I use this amazing transformational technology to basically either embellish my product offering or find a new problem to solve using it? For me, both sides of the argument are very valid. They're very interesting in their own way. For today's session, we're going to focus a lot more on the latter. So how can you use generative AI, large language models, in a way that you can solve problems or enrich already existing solutions? But I'm more than happy to discuss the other side of the coin as well. For me, this is fascinating. And before the live stream, we had a conversation with Julian. Just to say what I said before, it feels to me like it's a new revolution in technology and in humanity in general. The way we work changes a lot, and these tools give us the opportunity to change how we think about things, what problems we can solve, how fast we can solve them. So they become catalysts in how we operate in everyday life, right? So part of it is identifying where you can use these tools to solve problems that you either couldn't before, or you did it in a way that was not optimized or optimum, let's say. So yeah, it's a fascinating field for sure. I do have a very small demo, and I also want to, again, I'm not going to focus on the demo side of things. It's more about demonstrating a mindset around how you build an MVP, how you think about solving problems, what are the tools, what are the building blocks. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely get into some of the different infrastructure choices as you're thinking about an MVP and what's the fastest way to build it. We'll talk through what are some of the different options and how you can then decide for yourself what's the right one for you.
100%. So I don't know where you want to start. For me, it's everything goes. I'm more than happy to open it to the audience. I'm more than happy to start whatever you want to. We can start with a demo. We can start with the thought process behind, building an idea. Up to you.
Yeah, let's go with let's go first, I think, into maybe the different options from the infrastructure side. If someone's like, all right, I've got an idea. It's generative AI related, and I want to be able to build it fast so I can get this MVP to market quickly. So if someone were to come to you and they didn't really know where to start, how would you walk them through from the infrastructure side? So really, do they maybe are like, do I use SageMaker? Do I use containers? Do I use EC2? What are some of how would you walk them through to make that decision?
Very good question. So everything depends on who's asking the question, right? First thing I would do is ask them what's their background, what are they comfortable using. So just for a bit of context, an MVP is basically a feedback mechanism. There's nothing more to it than that. You need to be able to iterate as fast as possible. You need to be able to collect user input as fast as possible. So going with a path that you're comfortable with, you've used before, and it's easy to use is probably going to be the easiest solution or the best solution. And in this case, I would do the same. So if a person saw, let's say, they had an idea, it kind of ties into what I'll show as a demo. Had an idea to build, let's say, I don't know, an article summarizer, right? Because they don't want to read through articles, on end every day. They want to get the summaries and then see what they want to read. And they found a model that basically does it. So they found one of the models, let's say on a Hugging Face model zoo, that effectively does the summarization. Then what I would say is the easiest way going about it would be running it on SageMaker. The reason behind it is, one, there's a lot of documentation about it. Two, it takes less than 50 lines of code to do it. And I do have the demo to prove it. So in that respect, I think it's the easiest way of doing it. The whole thing, though, becomes, like I said, who's asking the question, right? If they're comfortable running things on their laptops and, that's something they want to play and experiment with, that's more than fine. But to your point, when it comes to building an MVP and opening it to the world, you can't run things off your laptop. So you need to find a more sustainable way of running things. So I would say to that end, running things on SageMaker makes sense. Running things in containers, if you're comfortable doing that, makes sense. But from an ease of use perspective and from an optimization perspective, I would say something like SageMaker works. And this is, kind of like spoiler alert, this is what you're going to see as part of the demo because it's very easy. And I put this together in like a few minutes just to showcase how fast it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there's even a bigger theme for what you just said, is that really first looking for what's off the shelf. And one of the conveniences I say that SageMaker has is with the integration with Hugging Face. You've got SageMaker Jumpstart. So if you already know the problem that you're looking to solve, you're looking for solutions. And if it's already in SageMaker Jumpstart or in Hugging Face, then SageMaker is probably going to be the fastest way to be able to just build something quickly because of that integration's like already there. And then the additional just infrastructure and features that you get along with it.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's kind of funny that you say it because that's exactly what I did. So I basically went to the model zoo, found the model that I think is going to work for my example. I used the code already there and I just deployed it. That's pretty much it. There's nothing much more to it than that. This is not, just for context, this is not training the model. Like Julian said, this is using an off-the-shelf model and just playing around with it. It's an MVP. Like, unless you need it to be something more specific and you can't find it as part of the open models that you find on, let's say, a Hugging Face model zoo, then, you don't need to train it. But if there's something you can't find, then you have to go into the training process, which becomes a very different discussion. But for the most part, like, you can use things, you can play around with them, see how they perform, and then start building on them. They become the building blocks more than anything else.
Yeah, 100%. Let's show it. And I think being able to see it and walk through it and see how, like, you're almost ready really to put this into production, because there's just so much additional just like infrastructure and so many other parts of thinking about how do you scale, other additional security design considerations that have already been taken care of for you just by going off of using it in Hugging Face, using it in SageMaker. So, but yeah, I think let's go through it.
Sure. So a few things here. Hopefully everybody can see the code. This is effectively it. It's a few lines of code effectively, and what it does is I've taken this whole sample, the whole code sample from the Hugging Face model zoo. We can show that in a second, and I can post the links to the specific model I've used.
Great.
So this is effectively using a model that's going to do the summarization. The main things to consider here is that it uses the SageMaker library to do this. Like Julian was saying, a lot of the groundwork has been done for you. So all the sensible defaults are already there, so you don't have to do them yourself. And you're basically importing a few libraries for, in this case, the SageMaker SDK and the Hugging Face classes within the same SDK. This came from the collaboration with Hugging Face. You pointed to the right model you want to use. So in this case, this is the model I'm using, the model name, and this is the task that it's doing. So it's doing a summarization task. I'm defining a few parameters regarding the Python version, the transformers version for the container to be spun up. And I'm spinning up a predictor using a specific instance. So in this case, it's going to be a G4DN X-large instance. And I'm just testing it out with a quick prediction. So this is all the lines you see here are basically taken from the Hugging Face model zoo. There's nothing I've altered too much. So you have that. Very important thing to note here. When it comes to this, you can deploy it into whatever instance you want. In this case, I'm deploying it into only one instance of this type. But you can deploy it in multiple instances. The infrastructure allows you to auto scale as much as possible. So if, let's say, for some reason, my toy example became viral overnight, I would be able to have the infrastructure scale so it would fit the needs for what my users would expect. So the one thing that I did was do the same thing, but with a serverless inference endpoint as well. And I'll show you that in a second. So this basically allows SageMaker to spin up a real-time endpoint that I can interact with anytime I want. The predictor object here interacts with the endpoint. It knows the URL of the endpoint. So within my AWS account, I'm free to interact with the endpoint as much as I want. So if I wanted to expose it to the world, I could have this sit behind an API gateway, and then the users from the outside would be able to access the endpoint. Now, the beauty of it is I can add authentication. I can add, like with Cognito, I can add different permissions and everything else. So I would have a fully functional solution with a few lines of code. The main focus here is just the model side of things, the model component side of the equation. Everything else can be an add-on. And I think this is a very important thing to always consider. Think of an application, especially an MVP, as a set of building blocks that you're starting to put together whenever it's necessary. So if I wanted to just play around, this is just fine. I can play around with it. I can see the performance. I can see whether or not the model makes sense for me. And if it doesn't, I can basically delete it and spin up a new one. That's how easy it is. Now, when it comes to opening up to the world, then I can add different components like API Gateway to front my APIs and Cognito to do the authentication. There's a lot of synergies there within the AWS services, and then exposing the endpoints, the real-time endpoints, so people can access it. So this is just for me, just playing around. I deployed an endpoint. This is a real-time endpoint, and I've also deployed it in a serverless fashion. So let's say I was just testing things out. I wanted to play with things, and having a very, very snappy response was not my first priority. Then I can spin up the same model in a serverless fashion. Now, there's obviously a very big price difference, and there's also a latency difference when it comes to the response time, especially. But this is also an option. And if you can see, I haven't changed too much of it. Just a few lines of code, pretty much. In this case, I've defined an instance, a specific instance type that does have a GPU. In the serverless case, I've just said, oh, it's a serverless instance. That's about it. This is the memory. This is how many I'm going to have, and I've deployed it. So the main thing is I've taken a blog post from the startup blog, the AWS startup blog, and what I've done is basically allowed the model to summarize it. So let me actually run it again so you see the response we get. I've tried it out with something else before, and I'll tell you what it is. And as you can see, there's two, I'm running two inferences. There's two inference points here. I wanted to see the difference between running it serverlessly and running it as a real-time endpoint. And this is what you get. The model is up and running just fine now. There's nothing more to it than that. And I'm basically interacting with the model. So I'll pause here as predictions are coming in. Any questions so far?
Wow. I mean, I'm just so amazed by how much code was already given to you, and and how little, like, I mean, my development skills are almost non-existent. I mean, I do copy paste programming. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my God, I think I could actually do this. Like, so it's really amazing. And I'm definitely really curious to really see what the different results are, because I'm sure a lot of people, when they're thinking about building an MVP, that is a common question is, okay, what endpoint should I be using within within SageMaker, because SageMaker has different options for an endpoint.
Yeah, so this is actually, to your point, this is a question we do get a lot. And that was the reason why I wanted to show this. So as you can see, the response from the model is the same, right? It's the same model running, it's the same input. There's nothing different than that. What is different is the response time you get from the model. So as you can see, I've timed the amount of time it took. And this is the amount of time it takes to run the serverless option. This is the amount of time it takes to run the real-time option.
11? Is the serverless one faster?
No. So serverless takes a no.
Maybe I read it wrong.
Yeah, this is effectively it. So the serverless option gives you can get a quick response, but as with everything serverless, especially with very large models, you will see a very different response time than you would with a real-time endpoint. Now, the most important thing to remember is when it comes to real-time endpoints, especially GPU-backed ones, they cost a lot more. So it comes down to the contract you have with your users or your potential users regarding what you think would be a viable option. So in this case, you get 26 seconds. In the other case, you get 1.2 seconds, right? So it's a very big difference. But again, this is a very large model. For different models, you would get different response rates, but the end result would be similar. So if I was, let's say, running an experiment, trying to understand what would be my revenue model, what would be my target cost structure, this would be the way to do it. So I would basically have a good baseline of how many responses I would get, how many requests I would get every day, and what would be, one, the response time, and B, the pricing model for each of the requests. And then I could basically build up my revenue model based off of that. If I'm building an example just for me to play around with, the serverless option is just fine. Some of you might have seen the text that was there before. This was my sort of toy example for summarizing sports articles in the morning. So I'd basically grab them off of sports sites and throw them in here and see what articles I want to read. So this saves me a ton of time in the morning. But like Julian said, like I'm kind of the same. Like if I can build this together and pull the different parts together in a few minutes, it's relatively easy to do. And easy is kind of a difficult thing to say. It's more accessible, let's say, to do, because you do get a lot of the code being written for you. So for example, the input pipeline for the model itself, you don't have to do anything about it because it's already being taken care of by the Hugging Face deep learning container that SageMaker provides. So the only thing I have to do is basically provide it with a text in a specific format. So this is the format it expects. So it's expecting a dictionary with a key of inputs and whatever text I want to pass it through, and I get back a response. That's pretty much it. And whether it is from a serverless endpoint or from the real-time endpoint, it's the same thing. And for sake of context, this is the blog post we're talking about. This is the first entry, I think, in the AWS blogs.
Yeah, George, just one quick minute. I know Denise was asking if how to view this on her laptop because she's currently on her phone. So Denise, yeah, I think if you go on LinkedIn on your laptop, I believe when you're on the AWS LinkedIn channel, there should be a section for videos. There's other different sections, I think, in the LinkedIn profile, and I believe you should be able to see it there. You can definitely let me know if that's not where you're able to see it, but hope you're able to see it there on your laptop as well. So just, yeah, I'll keep looking at the chat, so give that a try. But yeah, George, can continue.
Yeah. So, by the way, please interrupt me at any time. It's more. This is meant to be a conversation starter. This is not meant to be, the best thing since sliced bread. This is basically a conversation starter, and I think this is going back to the discussion we had before the live stream. I think this is one of them, right? So you're trying to find the right business application and trying to solve a problem, trying to provide value, and then trying to see how you can do it. And it becomes a sort of a working backwards process, as we like to say in Amazon. So you're starting off with a business problem, working backwards, trying to find the right pieces. For me, the business problem I was trying to solve is, I need to save time in the morning when I'm reading through articles. And what I did is I have a modified version of this, basically taking the keys, having programmatic access to a few sports websites. It grabs a few articles and passes them through a model, and I get back a response. So the main concept for me is it saves me time. So that was what the problem was, and I needed to find a way to do it. So what I did was I went into the Hugging Face Model Zoo. I actually knew the model, but
Yeah,
I
maybe you
tried to
could show
find.
us that and where you
Yeah,
found it. I'm curious. There might be people who maybe haven't actually looked into Hugging Face and really understand how they can get a model from Hugging Face and SageMaker. So maybe you want to quickly show where you got it.
absolutely. Let me share another screen here.
Okay.
So you should be able to see the Hugging Face Model Zoo. So this is Hugging Face. This is my personal page, and this is the model we're talking about. So the way to search for models is the following. So if you go to Hugging Face, if you go to models, you start off. This is very important to say. So I'll take a step back. When it comes to machine learning, it's very important to define the question you're asking. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to solve it either as optimally as you can, or you're not going to be able to solve it at all. In my case, it was document summarization. That falls under the category of generative AI, but that's a whole different discussion. So what I did was I went to the model section of the Hugging Face Model Zoo, and I looked up models for summarization. Funnily enough, the model I used is rated highly here. So it was actually here, as you can see. But the main idea was if you go to summarization, it's the first model that pops up, right? If you
Oh,
go
and
to the
George, a
model,
question that I just had as I'm thinking about this. So are the models in the model zoo, are they really accessible, would you say, to someone who has development skills, but not machine learning engineering skills?
yes, that's a very good question. Yes, they are.
Okay.
So a very important, like I said, if you're a developer, and we have to be very mindful of the different personas accessing the information here. If you're a developer, then going to the model phase, to the Hugging Face Model Zoo, allows you to basically play around with a model as it is, and then if it seems like it does what you expect it to do, then you can grab the code to deploy it onto SageMaker or your local machine if you wanted to. It's the same kind of idea. I would say the AWS option is a bit more, it's easier to do, but you can run SageMaker locally as well. That's also an option. So if I'm a developer, I can basically grab the code, and it's effectively what you saw before. I can copy it and paste it inside of a Jupyter notebook or inside of my ID of choice, and then spin up the resources necessary. So if I'm a developer, all I have to do is find a way to run the backend logic to interact with the endpoint. So I can add the AI capabilities to whatever I'm building without having to go into the science of things. Now, if you want to go into, dive a bit deeper into how everything works and what the model is, and what it's trained on and everything else, then you can definitely do it, because for the models in the model zoo, you do get access to the data sets they've been trained, the evaluation results. You get access to all the different metrics, especially for the reputable models like this one. And you get also the data set that the model was trained on, which is a very, very important topic because it raises issues of bias. So a lot of models, it's something to be mindful of when you're trying them out, because models do carry inherent bias in them. There's techniques to understand whether or not a model is biased or not. It's important to be mindful of using models that you haven't trained yourself, in data sets you haven't trained yourself. So yeah, thank you for raising that question.
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, great piece of advice there. And so, because there's probably a lot of people who they see what's happening with AI, and specifically lately with generative AI, and so they're really excited. They see a lot of use cases to start a business, to build it into their business as a startup. So how would you like, if you were looking here, if you were a startup and you were looking at this and looking at the sources, could you maybe talk through your thinking of how would you look at how it was trained and evaluate, okay, based on my problem, should I use this model here or do more research on what's already available?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to generative AI and large language models, so generative AI comes from, the way I like to think about it, generative AI, at least the text part of it, is effectively supersedes large language models, or at least uses them. Large language models as a component of generative AI, as a concept, are trained on very large corpuses of data. So for example, some of the most popular models have been trained on, let's say, the Wikipedia's corpus and others. It becomes very imperative trying to understand what everything was trained on. So for example, some of the most highly rated models on the Hugging Face Model Zoo, you can actually see the data set they've been trained on. So if you go to a model, again, I'm on the same model I was before, I can actually see the model, the data set that the model was trained on. So I have full access to the data set. So in this case, it's dialogues and summaries, because it's a summarization model. So I can basically go through it and check either by hand or through specific techniques as to whether or not the model does show any sort of side of bias. If I go through the examples and I find that they match what I'm trying to solve, in this case, it's natural language. So there's nothing too specific about it. There's no specific business terms or anything like it. So for any sort of article that you pass through this model, you would get a good result back. So for me, this is a good one to use. Now, that being said, I need to test it out. I need to train it, or I need to test it out and see. And if it doesn't do what I'm expecting it to do, I need to further train it or fine tune it. To your point about generative AI is a beautiful piece of technology, honestly, as a domain. It's revolutionary in its concept, especially when it comes to creating images or creating things like the summarization text that you saw here. But everything is built on specific components, right? So built on large language models, which are built on specific data sets. When it comes to images, it's a whole different discussion. But when it comes to the tech side of things, at least, you get a good idea of how things are built from the data sets. So I would say use the mostly used data sets on Hugging Face. That's an easy win. And take a look at the data sets they were trained with, just to see if they make sense. That would be it. Obviously, there's a lot of techniques of detecting bias. I'm not going to go into that because I don't think we have the time for that. But it's important, especially when you're playing around with it, it's fine. But if you open it to people, if you allow users to actually access the resources, it's imperative that you understand what models you're running. We've seen examples of models not performing as they should in a social context. I'm not going to name any names, but they do, because models they're not smart as people think. They are just trained on a set of data. They calculate the probabilities of what the next word in a sentence will be, and they create it. That's generative AI text in a sentence. So based on the corpus that the model has been trained on, you get a result back. And that's how you get the summary that you saw before. It's analyzing the text and predicting after each word what the probability of the next word will be, and then giving you that output. This is a gross oversimplification, but that's it in a nutshell.
I love how you said that. And I love how you just explained the level of depth and thinking behind deciding, okay, is this a model that I should be using for my use case? Because it's something I would say as a general theme, I sometimes see with startups, and I'm sure you do too, is where the startups know the problem that they're solving and they're looking to build it fast for the most cost-effective possible option. And that's, of course, why we're here to help. But I think with some of that hyper focus, sometimes they'll look for a solution and they'll use a solution that maybe is not necessarily designed to be the optimal. Like maybe like in this example, I would question if being able to read medical literature and summarizing it is really going to be that effective. I don't know if it's been trained on Wikipedia and like the news articles. Is this going to be used for medical literature and medical advice? I wouldn't. It's not something I would use. I would look for something else. So I think those are the kinds of questions that we like to advise startups as you're thinking about really what to actually be building and how to use this for your business. Those are the kinds of, I think, questions that you should be thinking about for yourself.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. For me, that's the most important thing. Understanding what the building block you're putting in place is. This would not be used for medical predictions, for example. This is not the right model. That being said, there's a lot of models in the model zoo that are trained on medical corpuses. So you can basically take that and use that as the basic building block. So if I was doing the same summarization, but let's say let's make it a bit more interesting. Let's say you're in a doctor's office and you need to be able to transcribe the conversations between the doctor and his assistant. So basically take the spoken words and effectively create a summary of, let's say we had a meeting today and I want to create a summary of it. How would you go about doing that? Well, it's about building blocks. Like we said, it's defining the problem and working backwards. So the problem is we need to have a summarization of what we said. And in a medical setting, very important thing to note. So working backwards, we have something that does the summarization for us. So if you give it a piece of text, it would summarize it for us. Great, awesome. Is it the right one, the one we have for what we want to do? Probably not. So we need to change that out with a model that makes sense to work in a medical field. Okay, great, we have that. Let's say we go through the models and we find one. More than happy to do the exercise, but I don't remember any specific model top of mind right now, but I'm more than happy to do it. Let's say we find one, it suits the purpose, we're good. What's the next block? The next block is basically doing the speech to text piece. So we're talking and we're not capturing the information from spoken word, right? So we need a model to basically do that. There's a few options in the Hugging Face Model Zoo. Again, same principle. I can take a pre-built model to do speech to text and just use it, just make it another piece of the puzzle. So effectively now I have two models running, and what I can do is get all the audio, pass it through the first model, do the audio to text, and then pass the text to the second model, and then get a summary. So we go from having a typical meeting, like always, in a medical environment to having a summary of what we spoke about. And if we start piling them up and storing them in a database, we can have an archive of trends we're observing, of things we might be seeing, of the terms we're using. So we can have a lot of insight as to how we do our day-to-day without having to do much, which again, we haven't done much. We're just taking code from already existing infrastructure that, all the guardrails or all the safe defaults are there that allows us to basically scale as much as we want, just put everything together and it works. So it works if I'm a data scientist because I can train the model, and it also works if I'm a developer. So if I'm a developer and I see a need in the market, I can basically create something, or I can expand my solution to include the speech to text component. So there we go. We have a more fully fledged MVP. And I can have a doctor say, you know what? This is not exactly what I'm looking for. or the model doesn't give me exactly what I'm supposed to see, or get feedback and then iterate on it. Then, Julian, to your point, I can go back and retrain the model based on a different set of data, or find another building block that makes sense.
It's so fascinating that, and I hope people are starting to really think through this as George, you were talking, and maybe they're thinking about, hey, is this maybe a new startup that I should be starting right now? Or I have a startup, is maybe there a feature that I can build out that will be able to save my customers time or make our team that's really small and lean much more productive, so we don't have to go out and hire an engineer, hire another person or whatever that is. And there's something, and I wanted to look at in the chat. So yeah, Denise, it sounds like maybe it didn't work out. I'm sorry it didn't work out. But I hope you join us next week on every single Tuesday, same time. Marika joined us. She said, interesting discussion. And this is more than a discussion, actually. We are here to answer your questions on this topic as well. So please feel free to ask us questions about anything generative AI, building an AI MVP on AWS for your startup. That's why we do this in a live setting and not in a webinar, because we want to be able to engage with you.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely, definitely a lot more fun. And I think I'm still just, and I hope other people are really thinking about just how quick this can be. So maybe just George, give people a context of from just that little demo that you created that could be used for an MVP. How long did that part take?
So because most of the code was already built, I didn't have to do much. I think most of the time was spent on trying to find the right components that effectively did what I wanted them to do. So I would say, again, don't take the time I'm gonna say, specifically. I think it's less than 30 minutes. But there's a big caveat here. It goes back to what I said before. It depends on who's asking the question. If I'm the one asking the question and I'm living and breathing this stuff 24 hours a day, then the SageMaker code becomes second nature. I don't have to understand everything. I don't have to read through it. The Hugging Face models I basically try different models and play around with them almost every day. So it becomes something that I'm very familiar with. I do know the ins and outs of SageMaker because I do work with a lot of customers and a lot of startups on running SageMaker workloads. So again, I'm somebody that actually knows. If I came in blind, for example, it might have taken me 2 hours, an hour and a half, an hour. It depends on who I am, honestly.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe it takes people here, if you're new to SageMaker, you're new to AWS, maybe it takes you hours, a couple of days, but I mean, it's still amazing. I mean, it's like the fact that you can be able to have a machine learning model, and then there's just other components that you have to build for the MVP. And I think what's even better is that a lot of these components, you can build them pretty quickly. Like when you were talking about the API gateway Lambda piece, there's a cloud development kit, or the CDK is the term that's often used, construct for those two pieces, because they're so commonly used together. So you can put that together as part of your back end. There's probably other aspects, or maybe if you know of any other resources or things that when you're talking through MVPs with startups, that they can use to be able to build it quickly instead of having to completely start from scratch. Of course, please share, but there's just so much that you can already get something off the ground really fast.
Oh yeah, 100%. For me, I do have a bit of a background developing full stack applications, the front end and the back end as well. So for me, I've tried both. I've tried CDK and it works perfectly well. So you can basically add the components together. And I've also done the same with Amplify. So I've used AWS Amplify. And you can do the same thing. So you can have the authentication as part of your front end application. You can run everything. You can host without having to worry about too much. Plus, it gives you the CloudFormation template as JSON, which is pretty cool too. And you can extend it through CDK, which kind of extends on the functionality. So if you're building an MVP, I think that's where I would start. But again, based on my persona, based on who I am, based on what I know, what I'm comfortable with, I would basically take the front end component, build something so that users can interact, a very basic thing. So a text prompt and a button, I would modify the Lambda to be able to talk to the SageMaker endpoint. And then I would add the authentication piece there, which is already comes with Amplify. So I have a fully functioning MVP within a day or two. So basically,
that's a good call out. Yeah, and I'm glad you said Amplify, because actually on March 7th, so at this time, 6 p.m. UTC, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, we're going to be going over building a mobile app MVP for scale. And Amplify is going to be a big portion of that conversation. So you'll definitely want to come back for that as we unpack that specific topic.
That was a very good plug, honestly. Plus, it was not rehearsed, so it was actually improvised.
Oh yeah, I mean most of it. Yeah, this is totally. So there was so I love the demo that you just showed, and that there's really from there it becomes pretty quick to be able to actually just get something that can be deployed at scale. So, and then we've gone over the demo. Are there any other things that I know earlier we were talking about something that Amazon Science has recently published that you wanted to share with people?
Yeah, for sure. Let me actually pull it up. Let's see. Give me a quick second.
Yeah.
So in the race of generative AI models, and again, this is something we're seeing a lot, right? I think we're here. Let me actually share my screen. There we go. All right, so
there we go.
Beautiful. There's a very important thing to note here, right? Amazon Science is a fantastic resource when it comes to seeing publications from the Amazon Science division. We have a ton of amazing people working behind the scenes. And one of the things that came out recently was this model, which is effectively a multi-model chain of thought reasoning model. Think of it as an equivalent to a lot of the generative AI big models out there. This is a very, very effective model, and there's benchmarks to if you read through the paper, which is accessible here, you can effectively see how good this model is. It's something that I wanted to point out because this is the link to the model archive. This is the URL of it. You can actually play around with the model. You can download it and play around with it. If you do, there's just as a quick note, there's a bit of change you need to make to the requirements file because there's one requirement there twice and it's causing a bit of an issue. But aside from that, you can play around with the models. And for me, it's fast. There were two reasons why I wanted to highlight this. One, just to give a shout out to the big, amazing Amazon Science team. There's a fantastic website called Amazon.science that you can see a lot of the publications from the internal Amazon team. They're doing an amazing job. The other thing is that if you're building a solution, if you're trying to build these kind of like conversational generative AI models or ideas, you're always in the hunt for the next big thing, for better or for worse. And for in this specific example, you can get a model that will give you that sort of like reasoning idea relatively simply. So you can, I think the example here is very interesting. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit. Okay.
Yeah, let's pause on this for a second because I want to make sure we get this question before we run out of time. So DW asked us, DW has a use case that wanted to test ML with, and so there's emails about a legal topic across numerous people and firms, and wants to understand the communication between these two parties. So it's so the question is, what's the best way to feed the model email strings?
Ooh, very interesting. Okay, I love this. So again, let's break down the problem. It comes from what the end result you want it to be. So for example, I'm looking to ask for communication between two parties. Amount of times the topic was discussed. Okay, so very different things there. So the amount of times the topic was discussed, you can tackle in a multitude of different ways. So for example, you can get the emails, and I'm going to say something a bit controversial because the topic for today is AI, but I'm going to say it, and it's kind of an important point to make. You don't always need a machine learning model to do certain tasks,
Oh, that was a
even
mic drop
though,
moment.
I mean, if I'm being honest, it's something that a lot of people haven't, like, they think they need to throw a deep learning network on everything. You don't have to. Some of the times you just have to use the tools that are available. For example, if I was the one to do it, I would, and if I wanted to have a visual representation of certain things, I could pass the same thing to an OpenSearch and Kibana dashboard and
Mhm.
build a word cloud. So I have a visual reference of the amount of time certain things were discussed or not. Julian, I don't know if you remember before the live stream, we talked about one of my favorite examples, which is a podcast transcription
Yes.
service. And that basically covers the latter part of the question, right? I don't know if you can share the link in the
Yeah, I'll
chat.
drop it into, I don't think it goes into LinkedIn, but I will drop the link. It's only been going onto Twitch, but I'll see if I can drop it into LinkedIn.
Beautiful. We can show it. So the main idea is you can do that. Now, if you wanted to tackle it from an ML perspective, that is an entity recognizer. And there's two ways of doing it. You can either do it with Comprehend, Amazon Comprehend. So train a custom entity recognizer so it picks up all the different entities, or use the pre-built models. Just as a quick note, all the AI services offered by AWS and Amazon are basically API based. So you don't need to worry about the models. You don't need to train them or anything. You just pass them the a payload and you will get back a prediction. That's how they work. Now, if you wanted to do the same thing with SageMaker, you kind of saw how it works. I'm basically responsible for the model lifecycle, and I'm basically responsible for the inputs and outputs of the model. But in the case of Comprehend, you're just interacting with the service. That's all it is. So if you wanted to see how many times a topic was discussed, you could do it like that. I would say the easiest solution in this case would be dropping it inside of, like, let's say OpenSearch and doing full text search, and then seeing the different entities. The again, it's very important to understand what you're trying to solve. In some cases, if it's just text, like I said, you could do it through entity recognition. So you would find a model that does entity recognition. If not, you can use any other solution. Now, you can add on top of it, you can do, let's say, you could do the same thing with summarized emails. So pass the emails, summarize them, and see the different entities. So we get a more concentrated version of what has been said through emails. But again, it depends on the problem. If you can drop in the chat like any more context, that'd be perfect.
Yeah. So it looks like I can only drop text into Twitch. But I know a lot of people here are on LinkedIn, so I'll just explain how you can find it. So this GitHub repo, if you go into Amazon, if you look on GitHub, Amazon Science, there is, and then you search multimodal chain of thought reasoning, which I mean, multimodal, then you'll be able to find it. So this is what we're referring to now. There was also another question I saw earlier about if there's going to be a way to be able to look at this afterwards, a copy of this presentation, which unfortunately this is not a presentation, but you can watch the recording of this on YouTube. So if you go to AWS Events YouTube channel, you will be able to find this. I would say maybe a couple of days from now. So maybe check back Friday, maybe back Monday after they have edit it and put it up on YouTube, but you'll be able to see this and all other episodes that we've done of AWS On Air Startup is going to be on that YouTube channel as well.
Beautiful.
We've got one more last quick question, and then we do have to wrap up. So we're going to ask this in like a minute, basically. Sunil has a question about AI ML for preventing spam, and that's a great use case for AI. So any quick advice here?
Sure. This is basically a classifier. Funnily
Yeah.
enough, this is a spam not spam thing.
Yep.
So I would say from there's if you look at the SageMaker examples on GitHub, if you go to github.com
Oh,
SageMaker
that's a good,
examples,
yeah.
there's a ton of information there. If you look for spam detection, you will see a lot of examples there of how to train a model based on the corpus you have, so the emails you have. And this is effectively supervised learning. You're telling the
Mhm.
model as to whether or not specific things are fraudulent or not, and you're training a fraud detection. The thing that you're going to see when it comes to fraud detection, especially, is that you need a lot of data to train them properly. So in the case of these emails, you need to be very, very prescriptive. That's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
There's
Do,
a few other ways. I don't know if we do have the time for it,
do,
but
you, do you know
just,
if there's anything on SageMaker Jumpstart, or maybe if not, then that could be a place where they could look. I don't know if there is.
that's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head,
Okay.
to be honest.
I would say it'd be a place to look. There might not,
Yeah.
but I always, I guess, as general, if you have problem related to AI, what's the fastest way for an MVP? That's definitely a place I would look if I were anyone here who's watching. Go look in SageMaker Jumpstart, because that'll be a much faster way to get something off the ground.
For sure.
Great question. DW had might pie in the sky goal be if counsel given across emails is in line with general status law. Oh, I wish we had more time with this.
Oh yeah. Jillian, I think we need to do this again. Like,
I know.
Unfortunately,
I think we are going to actually do AI again, and I wish we had more time. We do have to wrap up here. So please come back. I think we are actually scheduled for March 28th. We are going to be doing again another one with George, the passionate expert on AI, is going to be here again with me. So I am on Twitter at Miss Jill Ford. So if you have any topics related to building a startup on AWS, hit me up on Twitter. That's why I put it there, because I want to hear what it is that is important to you. And this show happens every single Tuesday at 6 p.m. UTC, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 4 a.m. Australia time, wherever you are in the world. We do this. Oh, awesome. I'm so glad, Akaria, that you want to do another one with George, because March 28th, we're going to do that topic again. But come back next week, because we're going to be talking about migrating to AWS, how to do that yourself. And then on March 7th, we're going to talk about building a mobile app for your MVP. So thank you so much. I am so excited to hear what it is that you are building on AWS. We will see you next week.